Welcome to Family Center Focus, a monthly program featuring staff and programs at the Family Center, the Wisconsin Rapids-based agency for victims of domestic and sexual violence. I'm Deb Cleworth, Community Outreach and Fund Development Manager at the Family Center, and your host for today's program. Today's segment focuses on Domestic Violence Awareness Month, which began in 1987 and goes on through October. And we also are going to talk about the release of the Wisconsin Domestic Violence Homicide Report for 2015. Our guest today is Sue Sippel, Executive Director at the Family Center. Hi, Sue.
Hi.
How's it going?
Pretty good.
End Domestic Abuse Wisconsin has been compiling this report since 2000. Can you tell our viewers a little bit about what the report is about?
Well, the report studies the homicides that occurred in the prior year. So we're looking at the year 2015. It looks at the demographics of the people that were killed and the perpetrators of those homicides. Then it, over the years, has tried to draw some conclusions. Are there unusual things this year in the report? Are there trends that are beginning to be apparent? So that's part of the report as well. And then the report also profiles each of the homicides, gives just a really short story, a synopsis of the victim's life in the situation. So I don't want to say we look forward to it every year because it is a sad thing to read the stories, but I think most importantly, it gives us some information that we can learn how to prevent domestic violence homicides.
According to the report, over the last 16 years, people have died due to domestic violence-related incidents at a rate of slightly higher than one every 8 days. In 2015, there were 48 victim deaths in 41 incidents. Those are kind of scary numbers.
They are, and it is a year with a bigger number of deaths than the prior year. The year before there were 37 deaths, so that's quite an increase. The things that we know about the victims in this year's report, the ages range from 2 years to 2 months, you're right, to 92 years. So babies to older people. So, that tells us that no age is immune from this. Of course, many of the little ones were killed, by the abusive partner of their mother, killed in that incident. And the older folks, sometimes it's a spouse, but sometimes it's an adult child that kills them. So, lots of times people think that domestic violence is a big city problem. It doesn't happen here. This report pretty much tells us that's not true. While about 57% of the homicides occurred in an urban area, Milwaukee, Madison, 43% of them occurred in rural areas. So they do happen here as well. As is generally the case, a large number of these homicides occurred when the victim was ending the relationship. Either they had already left or they had made known that they were planning to leave. So we know that's a very dangerous, critical time. And, why is that? Lots of times we know domestic violence is about power and control. And so the abuser, when they feel that they are losing the control of that other person, the person's going to leave them, they ramp up the tactics they use to try to control them. So lots of times it ends in a homicide. Firearms were used in the majority of the homicides this past year. In fact, national studies tell us that if there is a firearm in the home, the victim is 500% more likely to be killed. So firearms are often the method. So interesting thing in this report, the most of the victims were male. That's not often the case, and people might pause for a minute and say, wow, what's that all about? Over half are male victims, but 73% of the perpetrators were male. So what that tells us is that the males that were killed either by a same-sex partner, another male, in a same-sex relationship, or they were killed by, let's see, something like the old boyfriend kills the new boyfriend of the victim. So, it's male killing a male, but they're not involved in that intimate relationship. Or maybe it was the father of the victim that gets killed. So, or a bystander, that's another circumstance. So, there are some cases where the perpetrator of the homicide is a female, but when you look closely at those as well, we see in this report that there wasn't a history of domestic violence in that relationship, at least with the person as the perpetrator. Oftentimes there's a history, but the person who committed the homicide was the victim over a period of time.
Sure.
Now they commit a homicide. So, it may be self-defense. It isn't often found to be self-defense, but it may be just a level of frustration and a level of feeling that they need to do something to end this that brought them to that point. So, where it is just the reverse when the male is the perpetrator and the victim is the female, there's often a history or a pattern over time. So.
Okay. A lot to digest.
A lot to digest.
A lot to digest. So while the report is done on an annual basis, this year Domestic Abuse Wisconsin issued a mid-year release looking at 2016. Can you talk a little bit about why they did that? And you mentioned earlier some of the trends and the direction that things are going.
Well, I guess the bad news is it's not slowing down, and that's what prompted the issue of the mid-year report. As of the end of July, there were 39 homicides in Wisconsin. So with a total of 48 last year, 39 is catching up. So generally a good idea because the cases are so fresh, they haven't gone through the courts, you don't know for sure if it's going to be determined to be a domestic violence homicide or not, and sometimes numbers even out. But I guess they were so alarming this year that End Abuse decided to issue this mid-year report, mostly in an effort for communities to think about what they could do to prevent it, so.
And that kind of brings us to our next question. What are some of the takeaways from this report? What can the community learn from some of these numbers? And as a whole, Wisconsin, because it is Wisconsin. And I think you had actually mentioned when we spoke on the radio the other day that nationally numbers are decreasing. But Wisconsin, unfortunately, is showing an increase. So,
exactly.
So what are some of the takeaways?
Yeah, homicides in the United States have been decreasing over the last couple of years, where they've been going up here. So, some of the takeaways, as I said earlier, leaving a relationship is a difficult time. So there's a message for all of us. If someone out there is thinking about leaving their abusive relationship, you probably would be best to talk to us before you do that. We can help you safety plan. We can provide a safe shelter for you for a short period of time until you know how your partner is going to react. So, leaving is often very dangerous. The other thing about leaving doesn't necessarily mean that the abuse is going to end. Lots of times, stalking ramps up and that sort of thing. So. Even if you feel like your relationship isn't a potentially lethal one, you probably want to talk to us too, just to put some plans in place. So, another piece that they talk about in this report, and by the way, the report is available on the End Abuse Wisconsin website, and I think we're putting it on our website.
And Facebook will have it on.
FamilyCenter.org, so you can read all the details. But another thing that they talk about in the report is a new, protocol that's being implemented in many of the counties in Wisconsin. I shouldn't say many, some of the counties in Wisconsin. It's just starting. In fact, in our area, the Marshfield area, will be attending the training this week to implement this protocol. It's called the Maryland Lethality Assessment Protocol. And it is based on evidence that has been gathered over the years that identifies some of the benchmarks or some of the things that might be predictors of a relationship that will become lethal. So this protocol, law enforcement asks certain questions of the victim, and they score. It's 11 questions. They score the answers, and then are able to say to somebody, you know, based on what you've told me, your relationship is one that we believe could end in homicide. So, and then certain protocols or certain responses kick in. So that's a promising practice that is beginning to be introduced in Wisconsin, not happening here in Wisconsin Rapids yet. Part of the, in order to be able to implement this protocol, Maryland, the coalition in Maryland does a community assessment to determine if the community has the capacity to do this. And, you know, right now, I think basically the Family Center needs to, you know, think through what we would do differently. We're often full. So, you know, one of the responses, certainly for somebody that's in a high-risk situation, would be to bring them into shelter. You know, what are we going to do? You know, it doesn't do us any good to identify these victims if we're not able to respond. So, sure. So that's certainly a promising practice in here. The other thing is the report references some things that we've known for a while about one of the key things any domestic violence victim can do is to contact their local domestic violence agency. Some statistics tell us that nationally, when they looked at the homicides at a national level, about 40% of the time there had been an arrest in the prior year of the perpetrator that committed the homicide. So there was law enforcement involvement, there was involvement by the criminal justice system, and yet this happened. And yet in those same situations, only 4% of the time had the victim had a contact with the local domestic violence program. So those people who need it the most aren't necessarily having contact with us or reaching out to us. So it's really important that, you know, you share our information if you know somebody in an abusive relationship, and encourage them to contact us. It can be life-saving for them. So
absolutely.
There's another study that said that that there is a 60% reduction in severe assaults when somebody has had contact with the domestic violence program. So all pieces of information that can help keep people alive. So.
Great. So just on that same note, to remind our viewers, can you share some of the services that we offer at the Family Center? And again, at no cost, as we are a nonprofit, and we can offer those services thanks to the support of the community.
Well, certainly shelter. We've been talking a little bit about shelter. We have a 6-bedroom shelter. People stay as long as they need to. It does not have to be a physically violent relationship for people to stay there. Emotional abuse is often the predecessor to physical abuse and can be just as damaging, if not more, than physical abuse. Sure. So shelter is available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We also offer non-residential services. So a lot of the things that people can access when they stay in shelter, they can also access if they're not staying in shelter. Help getting a restraining order, for example. Help as the case gets prosecuted in the criminal justice system. We can accompany the victim to court and to meetings with the district attorney's office. It might be support groups that somebody might be interested in, and you can still be in the relationship, or you could have already left the relationship and try to be dealing with some of the some of the emotional effects of that relationship. We have a 24-hour hotline, so we have trained staff that answer that 24 hours a day. They'd love to talk to people in the middle of the night. That's what they're there for. Exactly. So, if you just feel like you need to talk and you're not sure if this is right or wrong, you're not sure what you want to do. Or that's the time
frame you have to make the call.
Might be the safe time for you to make the call.
Exactly.
Just call. You can stay anonymous. And
everything's confidential.
The information's not going to be shared with anyone. So the hotline, you can certainly walk in and meet with somebody one-on-one. We have a children's advocate if you're concerned about some of the impact of witnessing the violence might have on your children. The children's advocate's available to work with them. So
I was just going to, actually, I'm glad you kind of went there. We do have our advocates kind of have specialty areas kind of thing. You want to share some of those areas that might hit a certain demographic, I guess.
Yeah, we're really lucky in Wisconsin Rapids to have built a program that has several specialized services. One is for children, as I mentioned. We also have a full-time senior and vulnerable adult services coordinator. Wow, that's a mouthful. I have to think about changing that title, huh? But she knows a lot about resources that are available for older folks or folks who are vulnerable in some way. It's also domestic violence or abuse happens a lot in vulnerable populations. People take advantage of somebody's disability or age. And it can be tougher to leave. We hear stories over and over again about older adults who are being taken care of by their adult children. They're dependent on them for all of their needs, and this is their child. I mean, nothing's going to make them want to leave them. So it's a different mindset in that age group. We also have 2 Hmong staff that specialize in providing services, bilingual services to Hmong victims of domestic violence and sexual assault. So that is another community or culture where domestic violence plays out differently, and
it's different culturally. So they have different.
We have 2 sexual assault services staff, so that can be part of a domestic violence relationship, forcing somebody to have sex when they don't want to, or it could be it could be another family member or a coach or a friend, a dating kind of thing. So there are sexual assault staff as well. So and we also offer a visitation center, which is an office exchange and visitation for families that have children in common and are struggling with not a good relationship between the adults.
So we really try and service the whole picture, and give as many services as possible to fit the situation.
And I would say one of the things that we do, and I think it's important that we stay on this path, is our services are primarily intervention services and prevention. We do a lot of prevention, but ours are not the long term, right? So our shelter is a short-term stay. People can't stay there for years, but we'll help you find housing that will be safe and affordable for you. We don't have therapists. We have staff that understand domestic violence and the effects of domestic violence and provide peer counseling. If somebody has a condition or as a result of the abuse they have post-traumatic stress disorder and need a therapist, we would help them connect to a therapist. Right. So, ours is the intervention, the short term, and then just as important, connecting people to the resources in the community for their long-term solutions.
Right. Absolutely. So. Great. Well, before we go, we'd like to talk a little bit about a special event that we have coming up in commemoration of Domestic Violence Awareness Month. And that's going to be held October 27th, a Thursday night, at First Congregational United Church of Christ, right here in Wisconsin Rapids. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the things we're kind of working on so far?
Right. So, as Deb said, we're going to have an event, a vigil, if you will, and there are kind of two parts to it. One is we will read the names and recognize the victims of domestic violence homicides in 2015. It's generally a very moving experience for people to do that, and we want to honor those victims. The other part of the evening will be providing some or giving some awards to community partners, people who have helped us out in this last year. We realize we can't do this alone, and that it's time that we say thank you and recognize some people who have gone above and beyond. People, law enforcement, we're going to recognize a law enforcement officer, a business, a community organization, and then somebody who works in one of our partner agencies. So we'll give out 4 awards. I promise you will only be there an hour. It starts at 5:30.
5:30
We'll be done by 6:30.
Yeah.
We'll have some light refreshments beforehand. Our plan is to, if weather permits, if we have a nice day,
It is Wisconsin.
we'll be able to walk over to the river, which is right across the street,
Right.
and toss some flowers and petals in the water as we read the names of those homicide victims.
yeah.
So it should be a short but worthwhile experience.
Exactly. And another thing we're going to be doing is having a display put up at McMillan Memorial Library in the lower level, so be sure and stop over and check out that display. So I think that about wraps it up. Did you want to share anything else, Sue?
I was thinking I probably should have mentioned, if you go to the Coalition website, endabuswi.org, they have all of the homicide reports
right.
out there going back to the year 2000. And so,
That's correct.
I mean, it's a lot of reading, but each report, there are some different conclusions that are drawn and things we've learned over the years. So they're all available out there. So.
And I think one of the impacting things is you get a report, it's, as you said, a lot of numbers. But what these reports offer is that little insight into victims' lives. And it's heartbreaking. I mean, you start reading them, and some are very short, and some, or you look up a little bit more about the person, or you look up their obituary, and they were moms and daughters and sisters, and it really puts the faces on those numbers, which brings a little more impact, I think, to it. So, all right, well, that about wraps it up. So thank you, Sue. Thank you, Wisconsin Rapids Community Media, and you, our viewers. Remember, if you or someone you know needs support or wants to learn more about the Family Center, just give us a call, 715-421-1511. Again, that's 715-421-1511. That line is answered 24 hours a day. You don't need to worry about waking someone up. You need to call, you just call. The Family Center is located at 500 25th Street North, and you can follow us on Facebook and Twitter and find out more at our website at www.familyctr.org. Thanks so much. We'll see you next time.